CBS News has learned about a report of serious problems with Medicaid involving psychotropic drugs and children.
Many children in foster care are being misdiagnosed or overdrugged. Anna Werner has been investigating this, and she joins us now. Anna, first off, just tell us what this report uncovered. What are the details?
Well, essentially what you have is the Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services said, psychotropic drugs are used in these children, and we don't really know what the side effects are on children this young. They're not really tested. There's not a lot of research because you can't test these drugs on children because of ethical concerns. So they said they wanted to look at children on Medicaid getting these drugs. What was happening to these kids? And what they found is rather astounding. They found quality of care concerns when their doctors looked at these and reviewed many of these cases. They found quality of care concerns in 67% of the cases that they looked at. In half of them, they found that the children were not being monitored adequately when they were on these powerful drugs, which again can have side effects that need to be monitored. They also found that the kids were getting too many of these drugs, that in many cases they were getting the wrong treatment, that they were put on these drugs for too long. So that report we obtained a copy of, and that's what they are finding when they look at kids who are getting these drugs. And many of the kids getting these drugs, of course, are foster care kids, because foster care children are on Medicaid.
We were talking about this a moment ago, but what's sort of the larger issue here? I mean, why are these kids getting these drugs in the first place?
Well, that was one of the things that we wanted to look at. So what we did is we surveyed 7 states around the country and plus looked at New York City. And we found that foster teenagers, ages 13 to 17, are getting the most drugs in foster care. It ranges from a quarter of these kids, including, for instance, in New York City, it's 25%, to above 50% in the state of Texas. And what experts tell us is that the problem is it's nationwide, that states have a problem with resources, of course. We're always fighting for resources, right? And resources, not enough resources are really directed at taking care of these kids and giving them the therapies and the intensive treatments that they need, not drugs, but therapies, intensive monitoring. That's a lot of time. It's a lot of people to do that, therapists and counselors and doctors, and that, of course, all costs money. And so essentially what the experts told us is that instead of getting the therapies, in many cases, these kids are being put on drugs instead.
There are a lot of hardworking, caring doctors out there.
To be sure.
Did you talk to any doctors, and how did they justify this?
We interviewed one of the top, highest prescribing doctors in Texas, who basically treats only kids on Medicaid, and he treats a lot of foster kids. And what he said was, these kids come in and they have anger and aggression issues, which ideally ought to be treated in many cases with therapies, but here you have them going into these foster homes. They're sort of uncontrollable, quote unquote, and the drugs are used, he says, to kind of contain their behaviors so that they won't continually get bounced from foster home to foster home to foster home. Now, some doctors might not agree with that approach, because if a kid really needs a drug for a serious, mental health condition, then you want them to have a drug. But if they don't need that drug, then should they really be on that drug is the question.
Right, because what are some of the effects if people are not necessarily looking at a mental health issue with the child and they're giving them these drugs? What kind of long-term impact could that have?
Well, we interviewed a grandmother whose 2 children were taken away from their mother, and then when she gained custody of them a year later, she found that her 4-year-old grandson, 4 or 5-year-old at that point, had changed. And she found out that he had been put on 4 psychotropic medications at the age of 4, and he was now suffering nightmares, hallucinations. He was seeing the covers on his bed move. He was seeing things moving in his food. And then he was taken off all the drugs. We actually spoke to him. He's 10 now. He's not on any medications, but he still remembers this experience, and he still has nightmares.
Wow. So where is the oversight? Who's responsible for keeping track of what's happening with these children?
That's part of the problem. And one of the experts we talked to at Rutgers University said that that is part of the problem, that there's not a lot of oversight, and that it's a very sort of fragmented system. And one of the things that they are trying to do in coordination with many people in the states who are trying to get a handle on this problem, because it's a big problem, is sort of to establish better systems. And he thinks that there are some things that can be done, as they look at and analyze this problem, to try to address these things. And maybe some of them don't have to be so complicated. So hopefully in the future they can start to get a handle on some of this. And some states have taken actions. They've looked at their prescribing parameters. They've tried to cut down on multiple drugs for kids like this, for foster care kids. There's some states where this has been a problem for a while. Texas, for instance, has been working on this problem for quite a while. They've cut their numbers down. They're still high, but they have actually cut their numbers down when it comes to the drugs.
Wow. Disturbing situation, but some important reporting. Anna Werner, thank you. And I know, Anna, you're going to have more on this tonight on the CBS Evening News. Thank you.
That's right.
Thanks.